Here we go. So welcome to Early Contractor Involvement, the somewhat belated launch event for the book, which was published in January of this year. Let's crack on in terms of what we're going to do. So we're in the startup. We're covering the agenda. Next slide will be housekeeping and ground rules. And you can read this on the screen. You notice items 4 and 6 are Q&As and discussion. I really want this event and possibly future events to be discussions with fellow people who have expertise contributing, so it's not all just me. We're scheduled 4:30 to 6. And hopefully finish at 6 promptly. In terms of ground rules, if we carry on to here, I do like to see faces, so I appreciate cameras on rather than just talking to blobs. The session is being recorded, but faces will be blanked out. What that means is that you will remain anonymous, if you like, unless you deliberately mention your name. And I may also say a few first names. Please, going back to that discussion, ask questions. If we do it via chat and hopefully as they arise, and then hopefully verbally, if you're bold enough when in those chat discussion bits. But if you ask verbally, you may not remain anonymous. Do ask promptly, do put up something promptly in chat if you do not understand, because I'd rather answer it there and then or expand upon what I say rather than you go through 40 minutes of not understanding what the hell I'm saying. And in discussions, as I said, I welcome contributions. I welcome challenge. I think challenge is really great. That's how you learn. If you're an intelligent person with experience, you might say something which I disagree with initially. But if you're intelligent with experience and you say something which that expands my understanding, my comprehension, that's how progress is made. Please take part in the survey at the end and give feedback. So with that, let's crack on with the content. But first of all, welcome to everybody. We have people from Peru. We have people from Australia, although it's 1:30 in the evening and at night there. So I'm not sure if they will actually log in. They're very keen if they do. And we have people from the Netherlands I've seen. I said one of the first agenda items was why ECI, or early contractor involvement, and this diagram here for me illustrates it. Put simply, it doesn't make sense, if you think about it, to bring on a party which might be responsible for spending 85–90% of the project spend on construction somewhere around here after all the value, if you like, has been added. Okay. Rather, it makes sense to do it at the front end when they can add value. And the more VUCA the project, and VUCA is an acronym used by the Association for Project Management, which means, if I can remember it, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous the project is, the more you want to do the stuff up front. On my bookshelf is the book by Professor Bent Flyberg, who's got the enormous database of, and we've got Hong Kong and Ireland as well, people have said. In his book Getting Big Things Done, about what makes a successful project, one of his mantras is think slow, act fast. Well, think slow is this phase, the planning and design phase, so that you can act fast and everything happens fast during the implementation phase. And of course, if you're doing stuff in here and having to think things through and resolve issues there, when you're incurring the big bucks and especially the time-related costs, that's going to have a big effect. So yes, I am recording this. Okay. On costs and non-productive costs, which you wouldn't otherwise incur, i.e. time-related costs. So that's the big reason for using it. But there is a big reason for not using early contractor involvement, as in you use this phase on a cost reimbursable contract, the stage one, and then you move into the construction phase having agreed a price normally. Well, the problem is, the generic disadvantage is the contractor has you by the short and curlies effectively as you get towards that phase, especially if it's a time-related project or a time deadline is approaching. So a loss of competitive pressure to agree that target prices or budget. What does that imply? And I'll talk about it later in a bit more detail, but it does imply that you really need to nail the mechanism for agreeing the stage two prices in the original contract as a contractual obligation. And the number of where I've been working for contractors, the number of times I've seen that, or I've gone in for clients and there's a few issues, and it really is very brief. It's sort of, we'll get together in a room and be collaborative. I exaggerate for effect, but you know, it's not very prescriptive at all, and therefore it's all up in the air and a bit vague. One of the things I've sort of classified, and I think I was the only one to do it in the book, is sort of archetypes, early contractor archetypes. And essentially I've come up with 6, but as we shall see, you can merge and match them. So I won't go through them on here. I will got individual slides to go through them. So type 1 and type 2 are early in contractor involvement under 2 contracts, where the first contract is a consultancy service. What's the difference between them? Well, so stage 1, the early contractor involvement services stage, is on a professional services contract. A type 1 is where the contractor is only giving advice or doing simple assignments. So it could be, can you give me, I've got this, you want to this new asset on a live site, a motorway, whatever it is. How do we do it at a high level? What are the options for us to do it? Yep, to come up with some sort of budget in order to justify, have a business case. Is it feasible for the budget? Or it could be simple assignments. So that's simple assignments. Or it could be the client has their own consultant doing the design and they want buildability advice, etc. So literally it is come to some meetings, turn up, put your planner and some other people in the office once a day, give advice, don't design it that way, we prefer it to design it, you to design it that way, don't use that material, it's very expensive, etc. Type 2 is where the contractor as a consultant is leading the design. Okay, so that could be for the complex asset. When what happens is that contract ends, the professional services contract ends, and you get into stage 2, which is normally an engineering construction contract, option C. I should say, if you're doing a simple assignment, you might as well use the professional services short contract. A more complex design assignment, it would be the full NEC professional services contract. So stage 2 is normally for detailed design and construction, although one of the trends I am picking up across all ECI is people are moving much more towards, let's get everything sorted in stage 1. Let's try and nail the design in stage 1 completely, rather than hold some problems over into stage 2, and we'll sort them out collaboratively. And yes, you might be sorting them out collaboratively, but if you're incurring time-related costs on site while you're sorting them out, they're going to cost a lot more. So a trend is everything apart from the construction is done in stage 1, or as much as possible. What's the pros and cons of type 1? Well, the pro is can be used for very, very early contractor involvement to shape scope and method, including whether the project's viable or not. You can read the next bullet point. 2 contracts allow for a natural break if does not proceed. There's no requirement or obligation to carry on. And one of the things I am seeing again develop is in frameworks, the professional services contract being done as a term arrangement, where if you like, the contractor is employed as a consultant on an annual basis. Individual tasks are instructed under the professional services short contract as a compensation event. Why is it an annual contract? Because each year the professional services, the rates are upgraded in line with inflation. Okay, under the framework rules. What's the big con of this? Oh, sorry, as in it's not a con, but the negative of it. It's not really suitable for complex professional services, and any professional services used in isolation doesn't allow for physical works, which can include site enabling, site investigation. So if they say, actually, before we do our design, we want to know a bit more about this, and that means we need to do some extra boreholes, well, that's physical work and the contractor's not insured for it. So you need to put another contract in place. Which leads on to type 2, where the contractor is leading the design. And notice I've put in here with an ECSC, which would be an engineering construction short contract, or a term services contract for early works, to overcome that hurdle of we might need to do some physical work. So pros, again, a lot of the same stuff, but more complex, technical and program wise can be done in here. So where there's design interdependencies and someone can't design this until that element of design's been done, arguably gives the client more control over the design services versus the type 3, which is the classic early contractor involvement, which we'll come to. But there are some disadvantages. Need 2 contracts for EC stage 1, which probably need to be linked together for an overarching agreement. By that I mean, if you want some physical works being done, and it's quite common on a complex project that you want some further site investigation, you want some enabling works or early service diversions or seasonal works, environmental seasonal works, etc., to de-risk the project. And that means that the scope of the engineering construction short contract would need to be flexible. You'll be adding in work as the need for that work becomes apparent, or you need to put in sign up a new contract. What some clients in repeat order clients in frameworks are doing is putting in an annual term services contract, where each task, if you like, is instructed as a task order under those contracts. So again, they don't need to sign an individual contract every time a bit of extra work is identified. Okay. So when to use it? Probably best to use when you don't anticipate any, or there will be limited, simple physical works in stage 1, not too complex. If the former and you want the option to do physical works, then you need provision under an overarching agreement to add in an engineering construction short contract, or in your framework, an annual term services contract, where you can just instruct those tasks. So that's the big downside of that type 2, if you like. It doesn't really allow for it. You've got to put in place other contracts. Probably easier to implement than in the private sector, but obstacles for the public sector are not insurmountable. But what you've got to do, I think, is anticipate those problems so that they can be built into the agreements under the public sector. I know we have at least one lawyer in the audience, but I would imagine that if you start adding in contracts and stuff into where there's been a procurement, then potentially you're opening or a public sector procurement, potentially you're open to challenge on that. So you have to anticipate that. Before we go on to type 3, which is classic, ECI, i.e. in a cost reimbursable contract phase followed by a target cost contract. Very briefly, what's a target cost contract? Well, the contractor incurs defined cost during the contract plus its fee. It's paid this much as the contract progresses, but there is a target prices under NEC in place. And then there is pain or gain rate relevant to that. So this line splits that, this 50-50, so it's a 50-50 pain gain share. How much does the contractor get paid? Ultimately, well, it gets paid its defined cost plus fee. And in this case, yippee, we're in gain. So it gets paid this much extra compared with a cost-based contract. And the client gets this much money back compared with a price-based contract. One of the key reasons why they're used in partnering or collaborative relationships is providing the contract gets enough of a share, or both parties, I should say, get enough of a share of any savings or pain, there's an incentive to work together to reduce costs along this line, yeah, wherever you are. Okay, so there's an alignment of interests in terms of cost, shall we say. And that's why they were originally used for partnering arrangements, and they're the basis for most, but not all ECI arrangements. So moving on to type 3, classic early contractor involvement under one contract. And by that, I mean, it's the one which is written into the NEC as option X22. Okay. So this is the default without any amendment. So stage 1 is done on a cost plus basis. And it's best used where the contractor is leading the design. They are probably employing a consultant to do that design, but they're leading it and managing it, getting their supply chains detailed input into it, etc. And doing some physical work. So site investigation, enabling works, seasonal works to get them off the critical path, whatever it is, yeah. And then hopefully you agree a prices and so on. If you don't, there's a break, or if you do, there's a notice to proceed, and the contract proceeds on the basis of stage 2, a target cost contracts with the stage 1 costs subsumed, if you like, into the target. So if it's a £10 million contract to construct the works, but the contractor spent £1 million in stage 1, the target becomes £11 million in simple terms. Okay. And it's normally for detailed design and construction, but just to reiterate, I'm seeing more and more design being done in this phase, in stage 1. Pros and cons. Well, the pro is well understood and used, standard NE clauses that have evolved with use. So the X22 clauses actually originally came out, I think it was in 2015 for NEC3. They were then included as X22 when NEC4 came out, and every update to those conditions, of which I think there's about 4 now, they've tweaked the clauses and so on. So they've been refined, and you'd think they were perfect by now. However, the nature of large ECI contracts means there will always need to be some bespoking of clauses, i.e. amendments, as with other types, yeah. And I personally have some criticisms of even the latest version of those ECI clauses and would amend them even if I was doing this, right? 1. Complex design, so some more pros. Complex design, site investigation and more substantial works are done in one contract, and arguably easier to transition to stage 2 than having to sign another contract and having to go up the corporate governance bit and everything like that. Yeah, it's a notice to proceed under the same contract. But if you don't wish to proceed to stage 2, that's when it could potentially be problems. And one of the criticisms I had until the last amendment to the standard clauses was it wasn't very clear around the termination provisions and what applied, and actually what was the contract prices potentially as well, which could have caused difficulties. Another disadvantage, the contractor has more bargaining power than types 1 and 2 because it has the contract to do this. Yeah, And contractor is more likely, because it's got less bargaining power, to keep opportunities in its back pocket, and suddenly it finds them once it's instructed to proceed with stage 2. And that could be design solutions, but it could be, oh, if we do it this way and this way, then suddenly our program, we save 2 months or something like that. And that's a joint saving, of which I get a larger share, for instance, a share as a contractor. So when to use it? When the design development is reasonably complex compared with type 1, and you anticipate a reasonable amount of additional site investigation stroke enabling works in stage 1 versus type 2, and later types aren't suitable, and we haven't covered later types, okay, but we're getting there. So I'm just going to open up the chat and just see if there's any chat appeared. Right, okay, no, just I'm just on the international one. Oh, what's happened here? Right, so type 4 is early contractor involvement with one ECC contract, and that contract is under option E with X22. So it is standard clauses again, yeah, which have evolved, although this hasn't been used this much. Stage 1 is done on a very similar basis to type 3. Cost plus basis, best used when the contractor's leading the design and doing physical works. The difference is, and then there's a natural break, as in which effectively it's terminated. Again, I'd like to see the termination provisions clearer, or a notice proceed. Stage 2 is then again done on a cost plus contract, but with a target set at a higher level. That higher level, if you like, includes what would commonly be compensation events, or many of those things which would commonly be called compensation events. And it may also include plant costs. So we're expanding a motorway. We need more land, whether that's temporary or whether it's for construction. You know, temporary for leave for construction, and that cost falls on the client directly because they don't wish to pay the contractor's fee percentage on it, say. Those costs are part of that budget. So the budget is effectively the fulcrum around which project cost, which includes the contractor's defined cost plus fee and the client's other costs, falls around. However, as written, there is no pain, right, which I'll illustrate on the next slide. Typically, the contract is entered into earlier compared with type 3, and there is more risk in that budget. And notice I've put risk with red and green. So risk is, there is downside risk, but there is more opportunity in there as well. Okay, because it's entered into an earlier phase, because the team collectively, through the interplay between the client's costs, which the contractor's now motivated to save, and the defined costs, there is more potential. So, for instance, a contractor could agree to a more expensive construction cost. In return, the land take is reduced, and overall that's a reduction in project cost for which the contractor benefits, as an example. Okay, so to illustrate that, you've got the project cost here, you've got the contract budget, which is set higher than the target prices which might be there. So it includes most client costs, not necessarily all, and far fewer reasons to adjust in any EC speak. Compensation events, they're built in. Sorry, people are still arriving. So the contractor's defined cost plus fee don't take up there. It's the client costs added in here. Okay. And the thing is, as written, you share the gain, but as written, there is no pain on the contractor. Okay, so the client takes 100% of the pain above the budget as written. So what are the pros and cons? Oh, suddenly I think people have dropped out. Oh, people are dropping out or coming back in. So the idea of a contract budget is makes it a very attractive to some clients who have a fixed price or a fixed grant to do their project. So a grant comes from central London. It's £10 million. Let's make that our budget. Yep. In simple terms. Yep. Okay. And then the contractor's incentivized against to save on it with me. As written, it's very attractive to contractors because it's no pain. So I've seen some contractors out there. I'm sure you'd like a contract where you get the upside, but there's no downside. And that is a con, because as in a disadvantage. I think I need to change the language in these slides, yeah, from cons. In that the clients don't see why contractors shouldn't take some of the pain. Otherwise, there's no incentive to reduce costs if in pain. In fact, it becomes effectively a cost reimbursable contract, and the contractors might go, yippee, it's cost plus. It's not only do we not care, we're positively incentivized now to carry on spending. So clients want to add in some pain share around that budget. But the contractors then become unwilling to pay pain on client costs and risks which they have little or no influence over. So just to illustrate that, compensation events mainly arise because the client hasn't done, or project manager hasn't done something. That's already within the budget. We're going to take some more pain on that if you don't perform. Why should we do that, if you like? So what you start to get into is discussion over what is or isn't within the budget, which starts to dent the original reason up here for using it in the first place. Yep. I wanted budget certainty. Now we're taking things out, adding things in, etc., and so on. Regardless, the pinch point is agreeing the risk allowance in the budget. I would add the pinch point, the biggest pinch point when agreeing a target prices, in my experience, is how much risk do we include? When you're including risk of what would otherwise be compensation events and risk for client-owned risks, you know, it's even sort of bigger project risks, if you like, rather than contract risk necessarily. That's going to be exaggerated even more so. It's going to be even more true. It does, going back to it does allow for earlier agreement of the budget versus target. It's typically introduced earlier, but the big positive of it is that when what would otherwise be compensation events, which adjust the target prices in a type 3 arrangement, happen, there's no argument because the contract budget isn't adjusted, and therefore the parties just go, well, let's get on and work together to reduce the cost. Yeah. Because it's, as a contractor, I'm not going to get anything, so I might as well focus on reducing it. Likewise, the client, I don't need to defend my position because there's no relevant compensation event or argue over how much. Let's just get on and save money. When to use it? Between sophisticated clients and contractors who can get a handle on the risks to be added onto what would be the target prices to arrive at the budget figure, which implies a degree of repetition in the nature of the works being done. Otherwise, the risk amounts under conventional risk management methodologies are just guesses. You know, when I say I'm a sophisticated client, one who doesn't cause lots of compensation events, yeah, and the contractor has some confidence in that client. That's the case. And it employs some sort of ongoing relationship or framework, yeah, for that. Type 5. Oh, oh yeah. Oh, we started at half 4. I thought I'd way overrunning, right? Okay. I was half an hour later than I thought I was. No, I'm not. I'm all right. Type 5 is option A with an amended X22. So how's that work? Stage 1, the services, site investigations and other enabling works are priced up and bid as an activity schedule, if you like. Yep. So stage 1 is defined. It's the equivalent to the preferred contractor approach, which big developers still use in central London, except the contractor is paid for stage one in stage one for achieving deliverables. There is then a break, as in we're not going to proceed to stage two, or a notice to proceed. And then stage two is delivered under NEC option A, price contract with activity schedule. Normally for detailed design and construction, again, I'm aware of one where they're moving as much as possible into stage one of that design. And it's used where both stage one services and the stage two works can be reasonably well defined. And if you think about it, if one of the purposes of ECI is to reduce risk, if you can do a really good job, why wouldn't you reduce it to a priced contract with activity schedule? Yeah, that shows that you've done a really good job. Now, not all contracts can be done. So a big civils end contract with lots of stakeholders and consents and so on in there, that might be too risky. But a new build job, yeah, could well be done this way. So what are the pros and cons of it? There we go. The greatest budget certainty during both stage one. Oh, someone's got their speaker on. So, okay. Greatest budget certainty during stages 1 and 2 compared with other ECI types. It means the degree of risk, but to have that, if you like, the budget certainty, it means the degree of risk and uncertainty needs to be the least compared with other types of ECI. Otherwise, you are going to pay for that risk transfer, that fixed price risk transfer over to the contractor. And that, if you're a big client especially, who's the insurance effect, if you like, you're a big client with money coming in, and poor contractors with their balance books and only 2 or 3% profit, you know, they're not the best to have uncontrollable or unmanageable risks, yeah, to insure them effectively. So they will charge a larger premium for the same risk. That's okay. No need for and hassle and the cost of open book accounting. So one of the reasons why I think people are moving towards this, and I am seeing it become more, I know of at least 3 arrangements like this, is because people are getting a bit fed up with open book accounting and the hassle that it involves and the vagaries of it. So this avoids that. But if you're not seeing the contractor's costs, you're not getting any feedback on whether the original costs were about right or not. And therefore, if you're in a framework and you want continuous improvement and to see for projects of a similar type, the costs slowly coming down as the framework carries on, you've got no feedback mechanism on that. Okay. And there is this criticism, which is X22 is not designed for this. So this comment comes from Peter Higgins, who's chair of the NEC panel, and he was asked this question. He went, no, please don't use it. It's not designed for this. Well, apart from making a few amendments, it's pretty easy to change it to doing this. Yeah, it's not hard. In fact, 3 weeks ago, I did some amendments for this. Yeah. I work with lawyers who've done some amendments for this in different guises and so on. So it's not hard to do. It's just not the standard format. But given my criticisms of the standard wording for the type 3 and type 4, I'm going to make some amendments in any case. But I do think actually minimal amendments if it is the right contract strategy. It's not hard, as I said. Lastly, the type 4. Oh, so when to use when the client requires greater certainty than other open book based types, the previous ones, but the nature of both stage 1 and stage 2 services or works are more certain than other types. Oops. Okay. So moving on to type 6, which is I've labeled it optimal, or optimum early contractor involvement with a tendered price under option C. So they tender a price to enter into stage one, if you like. And for the stage two works. So how does it work? Target price is tendered by the contractor in competition. Okay. So in the example I'm thinking of, which is the Cross Tay Link Road around the north of Perth in Scotland, there was a specimen design, okay, but it had no contractual status, if you like, in terms of being incorporated into the contract. It was purely to aid the contractor to get a handle on what that price was. Stage one, this is for services and further site investigations are delivered, but minimum enabling works are allowed. So the contractor had to put a full business case to actually do work, as in de-risk work, service diversions, etc. And it was subject to the project manager's acceptance. And the contractor was given a year to do value engineering. And in sometimes that was just checking out the design. And in other instances, it was completely redoing the design, but a year to do the value engineering. Any savings found in stage one were not deducted from the prices. So this tendered prices still held, but there were compensation events. So if, for instance, they found worse than expected physical conditions, then that would adjust the tendered target prices going into stage two. Yeah. Okay, so there were the normal compensation events in this stage. There was then the usual break or notice to proceed, and entered into stage two, under ECC option C, the target cost contract. But then there was this transfer of the reduced risk. So the client's scope was effectively comply with all the planning consents, etc., and so on. That became contractor's scope when stage two was entered into it. So all the design that the contractor had done, that was now contractor's scope, and therefore if there was any ambiguity between any of it, the risk was within the prices. The contractor wouldn't get a compensation event. Okay, the contractor had the risk of, or partially had the risk of it was a road which joined up with the A9, the main road up to Inverness, went over the main railway line and then went over a big river, okay, and then carried on for 5 odd miles and so on. The contractor had a lot of the liaison risk with Network Rail and Transport for Scotland for the A9. They had, and they've introduced this since in the latest amendment, we also set the physical conditions compensation event to be based on what was known at this point when they submitted their the notice to proceed was made, right, rather than way back here. So if you've done site investigations and you should have known about it, that's reduced the risk, and that's this risk. So more ground condition risk is effectively transferred to you, but you should have better knowledge in any case. Okay. So that's type 6, and just I mentioned Cross Tay Link Road. It's literally completed a month ago, and it was under target and under the client's budget and so on, and was considered a success. I'll come back to it when we look at some other things. So pros and cons. Compare with other types at tender, gives the most price competition at tender, and it gives the most price certainty at the end of stage one prior to the notice to the proceed, because of that increased risk transfer over to the contractor, but doesn't necessarily give the budget certainty because there might be some compensation events. The scope, including the constraints, needs to be sufficiently developed for the contractors to tender. So there needs to be something for them to tender on. Otherwise, it's just a guess. Yeah. And they can value engineer the hell out of it afterwards, but there needs to be sufficient design for them to tender. Most amendments are needed to the X22 clauses of all the types, and the tendering contractors need reassurance that it's okay. Yeah. So because this was new, and Perth and Kinross did a great job of setting expectations, informing the contractors, circulating drafts and so on, but they did need reassurance. Hang on, there's a lot of risk transfer. We're taking the risk of the liaison and with Network Rail and Transport for Scotland, or Transport Scotland. Yes, you are in some ways, because you have to comply with our requirements and what's in your tender proposals, which were incorporated into the contract. But if you do that and then they just say, sorry, you can't get on the line, then that's still a compensation event, which hasn't arisen from your fault because you've done everything in the contract that you said you would do. Therefore, you get the cost of it. On the other hand, if it falls through because you haven't done what you said you would do, that's on you, yeah, or that's within the target prices. So there was a lot of reassurance was needed, and taking on board that scope, that feedback as well, okay, because some of it was we did adjust and amend the contract as a result. So hopefully when we come back to this ECC archetypes, ignoring the bottom line, you know what I'm talking about. And actually, section 3 of this was examples of a mix and match approach. And I could talk about some examples where we've mixed and matched things here. But actually, what I'm going to talk about is some examples here, or these ones. And the one example I use is, and I don't see Shahid sign up, but I thought Shahid was going to be here, who I did it with. It's the Connect Plus COFA 3 framework for national highways funded improvements to the M25. So Connect Plus run the M25 under a PFI arrangement. Within what they're paid on a monthly basis is the requirement to maintain it, but they act as agents for improvements up to, in this case, £20 million on the network, on the M25. So not the big scheme, which has got all the publicity. Where is it? The A3 is crossing over. That's a separate individual contract. It's improvements up to £20 million. And COFA stands for Call Off Framework Agreement 3, the third generation. They applied lessons from their previous for 2 arrangements, which was a during instruction arrangement, and the renewals framework, which is an annual type 4 contract with alliance type features. So very briefly, type 4, a budget, a contract budget. But rather than doing it for individual contracts, if you like, or projects, effectively up to 10 contracts would be amalgamated into an annual contract. And that would have allowances for mainly what would traditionally be compensation events, a few client costs in there. So some they might lose on of those projects, but mainly they were gaining. And it's got alliance type features in that some of the savings which were generated were put into a joint pot, which were then shared out. Unfortunately, it worked out this way, shared out between the contractors. So there was an incentive to collaborate with other contractors on the network. The business relationships costs are not paid for directly. So that's presumed to effectively be included in the fee of these contracts. But as soon as something became project specific, then it was done. It was the expectation, and the rules in the framework said we are going to be paying for it. Yeah. So feasibility and option studies, we're thinking of doing this. Give us some ideas and some approximate costs. A startup workshop, and I do stress a startup workshop, not a partnering workshop, a proper project startup workshop, and which part of which was for them to go out and flesh out what are the stage 1 deliverables and agree, if you like, the budgeting with a small b for the stage stage 1. And then the next bit was done, the main works were done under a contract budget, and we called it contract budget rather than budget, for the development and construction stage 2. Okay, so it was a type 4 arrangement. Okay, well, has it worked? Well, the Friday before the May bank holiday, I got an email, and it basically said, after year 1, well done, basically. Yeah. So these people, this is the Highways England person in charge of it. This is in charge of Connect Plus, and this is the person in charge of Connect Plus services, who are Connect Plus's agents. And Clive Cooper's someone very big in National Highways, right? And basically they wrote a public email or letter to the contractors saying, well done, you've done really well. Okay. So with that, we're getting on to questions on the archetypes. So I'm 5 minutes behind time. So what is your view of a sophisticated client? Someone that, crikey, that's a good point, isn't it? If I'd said an intelligent client, I could refer to publications. Knows what they want and can express it in sufficient detail that they're going to get what they want, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be to the nth level of detail. Knows what that costs approximately. Knows when they are being hoodwinked by a contractor, has that knowledge. Has a handle on the risks. In projects where there's interaction, inevitably someone's not going to do what they should have done at some point, but by and large they do what they know they should do, so they're not constantly letting the side down, if you like, and therefore there's not going to be lots of what would be compensation events under NEC. Yeah, has the right amount of supervision of the contractor. So isn't overbearing, but equally isn't a trusting fool, shall we say? Does that that answer the question of from Bill? What's a sophisticated client? I can't see where Bill's gone. Okay. So Barry says, what this clearly demonstrates the care needed in deciding your objectives and what you're trying to achieve. Absolutely, I come on to that. You perfectly identified the challenges, design maturity, break point, agreeing the prices. Big fan of stage 3 project approach and a complex contractor 3-stage work approach. Design stage, enabling stage, and design and construct. Yes, that you have to put in something else there. Barry, do you want to expand upon? I know you're shy, quite shy and retiring, Barry, but do you want to expand on that a little bit?
No, I think it actually comes back to something that you mentioned, John, which is about the whole idea of design maturity, and you kind of just summarise it in a bit of a throwaway statement that to effectively get an effective budget and program, you do need to, where you're going to take the level of design maturity to. So again, you see very often people starting off too early. And, if you don't get the design completed, I just have a very simple view that you can't then package and price and program things effectively. And exactly what you said, and that's maybe what's leading people to go to that. Let's get the design done. Let's button it down. Let's not get to some certain stage. And then we have arguments in stage 2 about what should and shouldn't have been done, etc. So, yeah. I think, there's some really good, but you've got to take great care, haven't you, in thinking about when you use an ECR and what you're trying to achieve and how to get the best of it. So, yeah. And I think you've made some great points, picking up all those points over the years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And if I go the opposite of that, the opposite example of that is a great big railway line, which is being built, where, and it should clearly have raised red flags by the client, where on one of those contracts there are 208 compensation events, right? which are assumptions and exclusions, and derogations and so on. So derogations, relaxations of the normal rules, so an easier compensation. Well, if you're a client and your contractor's saying, I'm not entering into a contract unless all this stuff which is uncertain and I'm not taking the risk of it is there, surely that's a red flag that actually the maturity of the development, the design, the accesses, etc., isn't there. And as you know, as one commercial director said on that, it's just stop, start, and you know we're incurring the time related costs are huge on that site.
Yeah,
sort it
absolutely.
out before.
Totally agree, John. I mean, I think we've had a project recently where we only came late to the project, and the client's telling us that all the design's going to be done in the first 4 months. 2 years later, they're still designing, and then they wonder why the costs have run away almost doubled in terms of value because the contractor wasn't able to procure and manage. So yeah, I think ECI is not easy, is it? I mean, I think that's the thing. People enter into it, and as you say, don't think about how you're going to justify the building up the cost for the project, and then also making sure in terms of the budget. I mean, I think Highways England certainly did that in the past, haven't they, where they've also incentivized both the budget and also the actual construction costs, haven't they? So
yeah, and you need to think carefully about the interplay between those. Okay. Shahid says, I'm here, John. And he said the annual PSC for COFA covering the tasks that would otherwise need to be recovered in the fee on a framework arrangement like ours has made a huge positive difference. Yeah, it means that the contractors, and that was the intention, the contractors are grudgingly giving their time, if you like. Yeah, they're treated as professionals, they're paid as professionals, and so on. Shahid, I'm springing on this on you. Anything else you'd like to say about that and why it's been a success?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think, well, one of the clear successes has been the introduction of this mechanism to pay for time on a long-term relationship type contract, where we had, for example, from our client, National Highways, in this world of improving the network, we had multiple requests for developing prices and planning works that then were, didn't make it to funding, or there wasn't enough money to pay for them once we've costed them up. So that's where I say that it's made a huge positive difference, because previously we would be sort of demanding that time from them without really any guarantee of the work. And when that happens once, it's fine, but if it happens on multiple occasions, that doesn't work either. And then the other thing worth pointing out is that, again, just tying back to the general theme here, that previously on COFA 2, the previous iteration of what we've now improved, we had we didn't really define very clearly what the deliverables and requirements of the ECI phase would have been, and we often got into the situation where people were just doing stuff and there wasn't really a tangible thing at the end of it. And it often just meant that, we were asking the contractor to go and do some surveys. But actually, what we really wanted them to do was develop the costs in line with a robust program, and the rest of it to take into the construction phase. So we've managed to iron that out as well. And that's made a massive difference. So yeah, I mean, I can only echo the words of all the grown-ups in that press release, that it's working well. So yeah, thank you, John, for your help with that.
Okay, right. Barry, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think that idea of treating a contractor as a professional, and because when you price it, how do you possibly price for? I mean, that's the basic thing I always was taught, that if you want a contractor, what are they pricing for? Because they don't know, if you don't know what the work involves, etc. And I think you can get, I worked on a very large airport project, which I describe as collaboration gone mad, and that was again a bit like you were mentioning there about the fact that there was collaboration going on, but there was no actual what are we working against. There was no plan against it, and I think that's absolutely right. So those points just made were absolutely spot on as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, really good.
Right. Okay. And we've got so do feel free for other people. We've got Harry, and he asks, how do you manage compensation in stage one if you can just revise the program completion date ahead of stage two anyway? So are you talking about the type 6, Harry?
I was talking about, yeah, type 3, I think.
Type 3. Well, in type 3 in ECI stage 1, there isn't, if you like, a target price yet. That's built up at the end of stage 1 and submitted as a bundle with the design, etc. And then effectively the project manager goes, yeah, either well, there's obviously a lot of discussion and interaction to get there, but effectively contractually the project manager either says we're not proceeding with this and we're ultimately terminating the contract, or proceed to stage 2. So there aren't those compensation events to adjust in the type 3. Okay, there's not a contractual prices yet and a contractual completion date yet for stage 2 to adjust.
So if the client was to instruct the contractor to complete something in stage 1, that wouldn't be a compensation event.
Oh, right. Yeah, if you're adding, well, not it, you would add it into the brief for the deliverable at the end of stage 1, which would include, mean that the prices are higher and the completion dates. It might also mean that they adjust their forecasts for stage 1 because we have to do a bit of extra design now as well, and so on.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay. So Dean, we've got, personally, I don't think many clients understand the purpose of X22 budget process, which means contractors having high fees and totally relying on the pain gain share mechanisms, and often having high fees to drive into the pain. Yes, absolutely. The research I did years ago, up until then the research said make sure the target is realistic. The refined research was make sure the components of the target are realistic. And one of the games, my professor and Martin Barnes, the two co-instigators, actually published a paper with lots of mathematical formulas in it, which showed that it was always in the contractor's interest to artificially lower the defined cost element and inflate the fee element. I can do it just by a practical example, but I haven't got the time now. So yes, you need to look at the elements of the fee. They also restrict stage 1 periods and expect everything to be sorted inside a limited time, meaning a lot of risk is outstanding. Yes, I agree with that. And lastly, I think before we move on, we've got, I've twice seen people wanting 2+ stage ECI, once for stage 1 feasibility, 2 for design, and 3 for construct. So effectively, what almost Connect Plus are doing, where the feasibility is possibly the professional services contract, then you've got the stage 1, and then you've got the construction bit. The other was spectacularly complex and a long-term project where they wanted to do about 8 stages, design a bit, then build that while designing the next bit, and so on. Is either a good idea? Well, one of my clients in Holland, they are constructing a new nuclear medical isotope facility, the first one in 40 years, and they have what's called an umbrella agreement with a contractor, and effectively they are letting it as individual, roughly it's a 1.2 billion euro contract, and roughly they're letting it in 100 million euro target cost contracts as design and deliverables reach sufficient maturity. And part of the reason for doing that is that if the contractor loses money on one target cost contract, they haven't lost money on the whole of it, yeah. And won't sort of abandon it, walk away, or whatever happens, and so on. So to make it reduce the risk on the contractor, but also it's a recognition that design will mature at different points. Okay.
It was I felt, John, that one was like a nice idea, and the question that I'd got was effectively, is this contractually possible? And my answer to that was effectively yes, but it soon revealed that the bits were all horrendously ill-defined. So it's like, right, yeah. While it's possible, I'm not sure it necessarily means it's a good idea.
Well, one of the things which I reviewed in that contract project, I reviewed the package one, the first package, and said, I haven't really got an idea what you're asking the contractor to do, and therefore on what basis they're pricing it. Since then, they've tightened up enormously and spent an enormous amount of time getting that detail right. Jack, I think the last point before we move on.
I was just on that project you mentioned, John. Have they done an agreement on how they're going to price each stage? Because obviously anything you lose on stage one, you're going to try and price into the target on the next element. So does it undermine the purpose of the target? Because you're just going to try and kick it down the road.
No, it doesn't undermine it. It does mean that you've got to have a sophisticated client with who's doesn't just go, oh, okay. They challenge it, so that does mean, okay, you lost money on that. Is there a lessons learned, or is it that we got, because it was novel, we marked up the pricing, etc., and so on? So it's a client who isn't just hands off and accepts whatever the contractor tells them. I will know more because I'm out there at the end of June, early July, for 3 days. Okay, so anyway, right, let's get on. So first of all, thank you so much for the discussion. This is the sort of thing I wanted it to be, much more. So headlines from the client's perspective. So I wrote 3 chapters in this book. I wrote, if you like, what we've already done, and then I wrote the client's perspective and the project manager's perspective, because I help clients and because I help project managers and mentored project managers. I could probably also do the contractor's perspective as well, because I help contractors, not on the same jobs, although sometimes I'm sort of more of a team coach. So number one is be truthful and clear about your real objectives. This is one of the conditions for success in projects, which the APM published, 5 years ago. It's another professor said, Harvard professor teams said this is the #1 attribute of high-performing teams, clear objectives. Too often I see sort of political-ish objectives, shall we say, or vague objectives. One of the contracts I was looking at and helping was a project on a building with 2 towers. One is a clock tower, very big clock tower, and there's a tower at the other end, and things were falling off it. And in the sort of contract strategy document, it said budget certainty was the #1 priority. I said, well, hang on. This is a World Heritage Site, and the biggest cost of doing the project is going to be the scaffolding that you put up, and you're hoping not to put it up for another 25 years. In other words, stuff's not going to fall off this building for another 25 years. If you do all the work and then things starts falling off after a couple of years, you're going to have to do all that expense again, yeah? So I don't believe that budget certainty is your #1 objective. I think it's a quality-driven project, and it's a World Heritage Site, yeah? And budget certainty, well, okay, if you want budget certainty, just transfer the risk over to the contractor. They might charge you a fortune for it, right? But that's how you get budget certainty. So they sort of said, oh, all right then. Yeah, so, the major project, 60-odd million plus project, and I could give numerous examples of where I've challenged the objectives in there. And the drivers will be very different from a large project for a one-off client who has a fixed budget, perhaps a government grant, compared with a ongoing client who has a whole portfolio and can delay a project if it overexpends, or put the money elsewhere if it under spend. And in that sense, what they want is to know if they're going to overspend or underspend. Having thought about those, you need to balance risk sensibly, primarily, and notice I'm not saying exclusively, but primarily because, or when I say the other things will be caps on liabilities, etc., things like that, extent of damages, so on. But the two prime tools you have are setting the pain gain share intelligently. So, for instance, if I'm a big client and I put all the pain on an overrun on the contractor, even though costs might be low at the moment, once it starts to forecast that the contract's going to go into pain, the contractor says, well, all the risk is on me. I'm not going to, and I'm going to bear it. I'm not going to, all your other stakeholder objectives, your nice to haves, I'm not going to take into account stakeholders' wishes now. I'm going to focus on A, reducing my defined costs, and B, pushing up the target prices, yeah? Because that's the only way out commercially. And if your other objectives are important to you, that's not what you want. Not only that, going back to the tendering stage, there's asymmetric risk on the contractor. Heads, I lose the full amount. Tails, I share the wins with you. Well, that will lead to a higher target prices. So think about them. Think about your propensity to be able to bear risk, the contractors. Think about in whose control they are, the level of control. The other tool is to add or delete events which change the prices, if it's a conventional target cost contract in stage 2, or the budget if it's a type 4 type arrangement. If it's a budget, you want few of them, but you can't have everything, because if you make you can't just add in scope and say I want a Rolls Royce now instead of a Ford. I don't know what make Ford Mondeo. I don't know what cars the Ford make now, and so on. There needs to be some mechanism for adjusting these, the budget. Likewise, do you delete physical conditions to avoid argument? Yep. And that then might affect the amount of pain that you share, as in you might take more of the pain if you delete the physical condition risk, right, for instance. So think about those, and you need to and consult the market and listen and respond, yeah, because you might think with your advisors like me, oh, we're doing a great incentive mechanism, this is highly sexy and so on and so on. But you go to the market and they go, oh, don't like that. Yeah, not bidding. Yeah. Okay. My biggest thing is keep it simple, stupid. There might be complex deliberations around the incentive mechanisms, but keep it simple, stupid. Carrying on, next slide. Prescribe a mechanism to arrive at the prices or budget, which includes risk amounts. Going back to almost my opening slide, this is the biggest area of contention generally, and risk is the biggest of them all. And traditional risk management, without the use of big data, basically involves guesses, because we are rubbish at probabilities. If you look at, we have numerous cognitive biases, about 140 of them, and about 30 of them are to do with our rubbishness at guessing probabilities. So you have the statistical Monte Carlo analysis, which if you're just using professionals' expertise is based on a limited sample size with loads of cognitive biases. So it really is a case of garbage in, science out. And contractors can exploit that, believe it or not, but also can clients. Then you're not angels. So you do want to nail it as much as possible, use data as much as possible. Nail open book accounting, both in the scope and stage 1 before the big money is spent. So in the scope, define it. Define as much how you're going to, it's what the verification, the monthly verification process and audit requirements are, and get them up and running in stage 1 before you start running the contract, incurring the big bucks. I had already had this slide prepared. I won't go through it in detail, But the bad practice that I see is, oh, we get to the end of the contract. Oh, now let's send in our auditors. Oh, actually, this is really bad practice. Let's employ a firm of financial auditors who will pay on a percentage basis of the amount that they save.
No.
To represent the project manager who's meant to be an impartial administrator. Guess what? Every grey area they go full on in order to maximise what they find. Then that results in a huge bun fight, and it's all done at the end. Instead, get them in early, get them to audit, for instance, the people costs, on a C-only basis. Get them to understand the processes, get them to understand whether head office discounts are applied on the QS's terminal at site level or not, and it's fine if not, but then it's applied before it's applied for, and the monthly payment, etc. Front end it, so that the final accounting bit is a tick box effectively. Okay, it's all been done. That's my top tip there. Last slide. Oh, and the client needs to balance probity with cost, as they are paying twice for this. They are paying for the contractor to bring forward the evidence to be paid, and they are paying for consultants to check it. And if you are paying, and as one contractor's commercial director said, a cottage industry has grown up around this. And it's one of the reasons why there's a shift towards price-based contracts, because contractors are getting wary of not getting their full recovery, or they expect to get, and clients are getting fed up with paying for all this. Okay. So last slide, project manager's perspective. Balance the impartial administrator role with project managing on the client's behalf. So the impartial administrator role, the first bit of case law on NEC was Costain versus Bechtel, was the project manager in matters of assessment, so compensation events and certification payment and other residual areas, basically whenever he or she has to accept something, is an impartial administrator of the contract, i.e. the majority of their actions, under the contract, with project managing on the client's behalf. In shorthand, whenever there's a may, the project manager may do something. That's when he or she can manage the contract as opposed to administrate it. And it fits in with that, be firm but fair in accordance with the contract. Don't, in the same way, don't just go, oh, collaboration, get in a room and be nice to each other. It's, oh, collaboration, we're partnering. Let's forget about the contract. No, right? Those end up in the doodah, in my experience, and don't produce the benefits. So not wishing to steal Shahid's words, but, that was the difference between COFA 3 and COFA 2. They properly briefed people and said, this is the deliverables we want. They applied good project management and contract management discipline. Set the contract up for success. So I will sort of very quickly do this. Ensure your team is made up of competent, good programmers, good QSs, etc. They know their stuff. Cooperative. They not only know their stuff, they can cooperate. They're not going to just create dispute. Who understand the contract. This is where I might have a criticism of the project manager's accreditation run by NEC. They might understand the contract. That doesn't necessarily mean they're a good project manager in general terms. Okay. Be empowered and empower your team. Don't, as a client, disempower your project team. There is a certain big railway project where no one on the client side can agree anything. And therefore, when the chair, the new CEO, back in December, he'd only been in the job 12 days, stands up and says our best estimate is 65 billion pounds. If nothing is agreed at contract level, how on earth does he know that? Because people agree things at site level and then it disappears into the ether, and and there's no contractual acceptance of it. So be empowered make sure you are, as a client, empower your project manager. As a project manager, empower your team, delegate in a structured way. What's that structured way? Well, do a RACI diagram. So RACI in a traditional stands for responsible, accountable, consulted and informed. So who's consulted before we make the decision and who's informed afterwards. In NEC terms, the A probably stands for accepted. Who can accept the communication under the contract? And the responsible is who does the work. Yep. Do that and do it with the contractor. So if you are in a full-blown alliance, a genuine one team, you're probably, you're going to avoid duplication of roles. If it's an option A contract, you might be like that. A target cost contract, you're probably something like that, if you people can see my hands. All right, okay. You don't want the contractor doing it like that and you doing it like that, and you try and fit them together. You want this organizational roles, etc., to fit together. Okay, so people know who to talk to, know who their opposite number is. And as a result, you can then do a joined up organogram for the contract team, the joint contract team, while respecting the two parties' roles, if you like. Set up a meeting drumbeat, as in, before the contractor submits the program, we'll have a programming meeting to iron out all the difficulties in it and differences, so that when it's submitted for acceptance, it can be accepted. Yep. How often will we have early warning meetings, etc.? How often will we have formal payment meetings? Yeah. Is it just at the end of the month before the contractor submits the application, or do we agree things as the month is progressing? Yeah. And then round a big meeting there. Set up information flows accordingly so that people go into those meetings informed. Yep. And hold the contractor to account for its tender promises, which assumes that they are incorporated into the contract. And that's a big thing from me, is I always want contractors' promises, and I always want contractors to know their promises are going to be included in the contract. If not, they're just words. Yep. And one of the things that I want to be evaluated at tender is this nice words, right, in their responses, or can we contractually enforce it? Is it to a level of detail where we can contractually enforce it? And I go through their responses, highlighting what is contractually enforceable and what's just nice words. And it has to be said, the vast majority of the typical contractor responses I don't highlight. Yet we make it clear that they will be scored partly on that. Okay, so but that goes back to the client doing that and how it's set up. So with that, we have not as long as I'd liked for questions and comments. So let's keep it simple is a good advice. We've got 2 comments. Thanks for the session. Day 1 implementation of managing defined cost is essential from Barry. Andy, I've even heard forensic accountants offer to audit for a percentage of the disallowed costs they find. Yes, I have heard, I've seen that in practice, etc. It doesn't end well. Right, okay. So don't do that. If tender promises are not reflected in the contract, are they unenforceable? Probably, yeah. You want them referenced in there. You want as contract data part 2, and this is where I think the words of the contract aren't right. I cross out the reference in 60.1 brackets 1 to the contractor's scope for its design. I cross out that for its design bit and just have contractor's scope. And then in the contract data part 2, we have 2 entries. We have the existing one, which is the contractor's scope for its design is in the following documents. And we have the contractor's scope for how it is to provide the works is a separate document. And therefore, they then are referenced into and or enables us to reference and incorporate the promises that we want to incorporate into the contract as contractual obligations. Okay, Andy.
Variation on a theme for you, John. What I've done with tenders, what you've just described as work. One of the rare occasions where I support a Z clause is one to say to sort of put contractor's tender in contract data part 2, reference it in somehow or other, and then make anything that's in there instructable for free. The reason for doing it that way is that if there's stuff in there that you don't want, it can't be foisted on you.
Yeah.
This way I can pick and choose. Well, you promised it, now you've got to give me it, and I've just added it to the scope, and it's not a compensation event. So it's achieving a very similar end to what you described there, just done in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I mean, what we've done with my clients is we've made it clear that anything which in them we can choose, to do, and that will be incorporated there. If another tender who hasn't won has suggested something that we really like, that can be added in, but obviously that is a compensation event. Okay, right? Okay. Yeah, Bill, don't forget you need good lawyers. Do you know any, Bill, who are focused on dispute avoidance to start with and not on disputes? Absolutely. A strong, understandable contract in plain English, but as you say, enforceable. And we've got Mark Grofing, contractor scope for its design added during stage 1, omitted in the latest NEC update. I don't understand why. To be honest, I have to say I have issues, as I've made clear, with X22 and bespoking. I think part of that is the nature of big, complex stuff, which I tend to get involved in. I think partly I'm not really happy with some of the wording. I'll get back to you on that one, Mark. And there I don't know it well enough because I do my own stuff, shall we say, right? In there. Right, okay. It's 6. Oh no, it's not. We've got another 10 minutes. I thought it was 6 o'clock. Any other questions from people? Comments, discussion, contributions before we go? It looks not. So with that, I will just, if I can find my cursor, just move on to the next slide. So closeout is key takeaways. One of the things I always push in my training is, what will you do differently as a result? Yeah. Okay. Because you could argue that, especially when the client is having people take time out from their day and paying for me and paying for their time taken out, well, you might have a nice academic, oh, that's an interesting thought type thing, but actually, does it result in you doing anything different to be a bit more effective and to deliver a better contract? All right. So any key takeaways that people would like to put up in the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. So while you're thinking about that, tell us, John, are there any good publications on this topic? If you go on a couple of slides, Andy, that will be, there we go. Okay, and you have those in there, and that's the QR code, which will take you to the book. I would want to do more of these on a monthly basis, probably more discussion based. So I'm pleased that we have had some discussion. So I really appreciate the people who did contribute their views and ask questions. In that questionnaire, I do say, what do you like about this? What would you like to do differently? But also there's a list of things, and I've done it on a tick box of subjects which you might be interested in, and timings and things like that. So please do that there. Hopefully there's a link in the slides. There's a link in the email which I sent the slides out with as well. So please do fill that in. So we will finish with a takeaway from Mark. Be brave to adopt a tailored approach to stage to best meet the project objectives, i.e. there are at least 6 types. So yes, select the most suitable one. And then, it's a bit like a menu, yeah? But you have apply the menu intelligently. Yeah, okay. All right, so thanks for that one. And that's it. So I think we're done. And amazingly for me, and we're going to finish a little bit before time. Wow. So thank you very much. everybody.
Thanks, John. Really good session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
I'll speak soon, John. Take care. Bye.
See you. Bye.